Hey, what's going on, sports cards fans? Ray from Philly here on this Monday night, November 11th. And I'm doing a special discussion panel video tonight with some fellow YouTubers. And we're going to be talking about this year's 2025 upcoming Baseball Hall of Fame ballot for the Veterans Committee, specifically known as the Classic Era Committee. Each year they have three different eras in the Veterans Committee: the classic era, the contemporary era, and the contemporary non-player. So this year they're voting. It's coming out December 8th is when the final tally will be announced. And right now I'm going to bring in three fellow YouTubers that we're going to have a nice discussion panel about each player and their career, show some cards of their rookie cards or non-rookie cards of each player, and kind of just see where we stand on who do we think should get in and who might not get in, and so forth and so on. So without further delay, I'm bringing in three superstar YouTubers. This is my first time actually meeting Dan from Dan's Vintage Cards. Dan, how you doing tonight? And welcome to the channel and welcome to the discussion. Nice finally meeting you.
Thanks for having me on, Ray. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you got it.
Your videos having to do with all sorts of Hall of Fame stuff. So
yeah,
happy to finally be on one with these other two excellent gentlemen who I have met in person, thankfully, and will be again. So
yep.
Appreciate the
Oh,
opportunity.
you got it. Welcome aboard. The next two channels are my friend Chris from Missouri. How's it going, Chris?
Going great. Thanks for letting me come on here. I don't think I'd rather be talking about anything else tonight.
That's great. And my buddy Greg from GRAIG'S Midlife Card Crisis. How you doing, Greg?
Good. How you doing, buddy? It's good to see you.
It's
happy
great to have
be
you on.
Yeah.
Well, as you guys can see by the screen over here, it's this year's 2025 Classic Era Baseball Hall of Fame ballot. And, you know, the ballot is coming out. It's already out now. The 8 players that are had just been announced, I think, about a week ago. And this is like a favorite time of year for me. Is next month, I think this month or next month, they're going to come out with the BBWAA ballot, which is sports writers that will be voting on that. And that vote tally will be announced the end of January. But they always start off with the Veterans Committee first. I still call it the Veterans Committee because I'm old. So they got specific errors now, you know, with classic era and contemporary non-era. Before that, it was 4 errors. It was the early days era, which was like the turn of the century. Then they had the golden age, which was 50s and 60s. Then the modern era, which was more like 70s and 80s. And the today's era, which was, you know, late 80s and the 90s. Now it's down to condensed to 3 eras, which I don't know. I think it kind of hurts condensing it down to 3 errors because now you're intertwining 2 errors for guys that were on the golden age and guys that were on the modern era, and now they're together in the same era. I think it could hurt some players that years ago were getting closer and now might be pushed back because now they're in competition with other guys. What's your thoughts on that? If anybody wants to take the reins here, and your thoughts on they're constantly changing this Veterans Committee with so many different eras every year.
I have thoughts.
Go ahead, Dan.
I look at this ballot and I'm thinking John Donaldson played over 100 years ago. Dave Parker played when I was watching baseball as an adult.
That's what I mean.
So I'm not sure how those two guys are on the same ballot because you can't
exactly
measure a guy like Donaldson against a guy like Parker. Both of them, spoiler alert here. I think both of them deserve to be in, but for different reasons.
Right. And that was my thought too, because, for example, someone like Dick Allen, who last time when they had the 4 eras, he was on the golden age, and now he's competing with guys that were on the modern era, such as Dave Parker and Steve Garvey and all that, which now I don't know what to expect now. Chris or Greg, guys have any thoughts on, do you like the idea that they've condensed for a wider era now, or do you think that before it was better, or what do you guys think?
Go ahead and go first, Greg.
I mean, I think that there's pros and cons to each, and I'm okay with it. It definitely makes it tougher when you're competing. Each person who's voting gets 3 votes, 0 to 3 votes,
Right.
and you need 75% of the vote. So now, if you've got guys from way back then, it certainly is going to make it tougher. I think that they did a pretty good job with the 8 that they chose. I think there are a couple of guys that I think could have gotten in that didn't. But when you're dealing with such a broad period of time, it does make it tough to even make it to this ballot, to even be on the ballot.
Yeah, good point.
And in theory, this is supposed to work, right? Because there should be less and less people from the way back olden days that should even be considered because they've had a long time being considered.
Right.
But it's going to change again because somebody's not going to get in that should have got in at a time. I do think they're trying to make it to maneuver the ballots and eventually do it to try to get more people that's still alive recognized for the Hall of Fame, because whether Louis Tiant gets in this year or not, it's criminal that his family and friends don't get to see his reaction if he does.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But when we talk about John Donaldson being compared to Dave Parker, that's not fair, because
No.
they had to they grew up in different times, played in different ballparks, different manicured ballparks, different volatility, I guess, is that a word?
Yeah.
Of the fans. You can't compare, that everything's different. And so I think they'll figure that one out. But eventually we're going to have to wipe an error clean. We're going to say, we're going to have to say eventually, we got them all. If not, I believe the Hall of Fame is going to just keep getting watered down.
Good points. Well, speaking of the ballot, let's bring on the ballot right now. This is this year's 2025 Classic Eras Baseball Hall of Fame ballot. And I have it in alphabetical order. And the ballot is Dick Allen, Ken Boyer, John Donaldson, Steve Garvey. John Donaldson, if some of you don't know, is a Negro League player. Vic Harris, another Negro League player. Tommy John, Dave Parker, and Louis Tiant. So some great names on this list already. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd vote them all in. But, like Greg said, there's only 3 that are going to get, you only get 3 votes. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, and we'll go around the horn. The first up, as I'm showing the rookie card here, it's 64 Topps Dick Allen. And Dick Allen's numbers, as you can see, 351 career homers, 1,119 RBIs, 219 batting average, 1964 National League Rookie of the Year, 1972 American League MVP, 7-time All-Star. I'll give my thoughts real quick. It's pretty obvious, how I feel about Dick Allen. The last 2 times he's been on the ballot, this Veterans Committee, he's come up 1 vote short. And it doesn't really happen very often. I do recall over the years when the players come up 1 vote short, the next time they've usually gotten in. Well, it happened to Dick a second time where he came up. There's 16 guys on the committee. You need 75%, which is 12 votes, right? So the last 2 times he got 11 votes. I know from a friend of mine who has a Facebook page called Dick Allen Belongs in the Hall of Fame, a friend of mine from around this area named Mark Carfagno, who's been really heading up this committee for trying to get Dick Allen in. Mark used to be a Phillies employee, worked on the grounds crew in the 70s. So he was good friends with Dick Allen, and has really been tooting the horn to get Dick in for the past 17, 18 years. And Mike Schmidt was a big advocate for Dick Allen getting in. So he was on the committee last time, and that didn't even help. So I don't know who's on the committee this year, the 16 members. I'm still trying to find out, but enough of me. We go around the horn. Dan, what do you like to say about Dick Allen?
Well, I'm old enough to have seen him play. He was an awesome person, awesome individual. He went through some really awful scenarios, especially early in his career. The whole Little Rock situation where he played minor league in Little Rock, and it was just a complete nightmare. I've read about that in a number of different ways, different books, different things online or whatever. But it's been pretty well documented. And so he came to the Phillies playing with a baggage on his back from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And some of his problems later on in the 60s were maybe self-created, but for the most part, he played, almost like, performing with those numbers while, carrying around a lot of baggage that most players don't have to carry around.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty much from all of the feelings that I've gotten from all the different viewpoints, I think that Dick Allen is going to get in this time, and I think it's not even going to be close. So it's not going to be a one vote thing this time. So I really feel like he's going to get in. And he's also the subject of one of the badassest cards of all time, which is his 1975 Topps card, one of his last cards. It's the one where he's literally wearing a batting helmet and playing first base and looking like a badass, and it's 75, and it's just everything is right about this baseball card. So I kind of feel like Dick Allen wearing a batting helmet in that card is important too, while in the field, because he's like the first guy. Dave Parker will come up with him too, but Dick Allen was wearing a batting helmet to protect his head against fans in his own home ballpark. So that's kind of another little symbolic part of this card that makes it cool.
That's a true story because he wore a helmet when he was playing in Philadelphia in the 60s.
Yep, that's
playing
what I mean.
third base.
Not necessarily Chicago. I think he just got used to it. It was more of a Phillies thing. But
True,
so I'm 100% in on Allen. I think he's going to get in.
Chris.
Well, I've been a Dick Allen fan for quite some time, and a lot of people. He was not a compiler, of course. He didn't play as long as a lot of people. But man, when he played, and take 7 of his years, and they were as good as Willie Mays's, and just a lot of stands up to a lot of great players. And so his downfall is he was not a very good defensive player, especially at third base.
Mm-hmm.
He was standoffish, and a lot of people didn't realize or recognize, or a lot of people wondered why you're a professional baseball player making lots of money. Just didn't take into a lot of things for consideration. But when I look at his stats, I'm a big WAR guy, and we all look at that, the baseball stats thing on our computer and compare. A lot of us do compare players. I got my little 64 I'd like to show. But when you look at his stats and you scroll all the way down and it compares like players, it's an impressive list of players that he's compared to that had similar scores as him. And two of them that had short careers that were firecrackers that he's closely compared to is Larry Doby and Mike Trout. And most of us on here think Mike Trout is a first-time Hall of Famer, not a first ballot Hall of Famer when he retires, not a 15-year ballot or a 20-year ballot. And so I do believe he's going to get in. But at the end, I would like to tell you who I think.
Yeah, we'll make our picks at the end, definitely.
But yeah, what a great player.
Yeah. Cool.
Greg. For me, I think Chris touched on something that I kind of feel strongly about, and you're going to hear me say repeatedly probably in this conversation, is there are the compilers, and then there are the guys that were like stars for a shorter period of time. So when you look at something like you look at his career numbers and his home run totals don't blow you away. His RBIs don't blow you away. 7 All-Stars is a lot, but there are other guys that we're going to see in a minute that have more. And so to me, I've always kind of been more of a guy who was like a star for 10, 11 years versus who played for 19 years and had 140 hits a year for 19 years. And 2 of the people of the 8 were shorter careers, but were really, really good when they were there. And you don't hear about them. You don't think about them in the same level as other players they were as good as, because they have a shorter career. And he has a shorter career. And so I think he'll get in. And I won't give away my votes yet, but I think he'll get in. I mean, he had 30 or more home runs 6 times. And in that time, in that era of the 60s and 70s, that's a lot of home runs then. That's not like it is now. And I mean, he was an absolute star for, a decade.
Yep.
And he's not in mostly, I think, because he didn't go an extra 4 years. And if he had been a DH in the American League for 4 or 5 more years or something, he would have gotten in a long time ago, but he didn't.
Yeah, I agree. And good points on, compiler for guys playing 18 to 20 years compared to guys who had more dominating, I guess, years in a shorter span. And his span's really not that short. I mean, he had a 10-year span. Brian Kenny on the MLB Network last week showed, and I'm not really a big-time Saber metric guy, but I've been getting a little bit more into it recently. And he did a OPS plus stat from 1964 to 1974 of the top 10 players. And number 1 is Dick Allen. The other 9 guys on that list from 2 to 10 are all in the Hall of Fame. He's the only one on that top 10 list that's not, and he's ranked number 1. And the guys on that list were Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, Willie Stargell, all in the Hall of Fame, ranked from 2 to 10, except for the guy who's ranked number 1. So, Jay Jaffe's written a great book called the Cooperstown Case Book that really delves into, his career. And same as Chris, I have the rookie of PSA 8 that I picked up about 5 years ago. So, yeah, everybody knows, a lot of people out there already know how I feel about Dick Allen, but we'll see. I'm not going to say he should get in. He's not going, only because of the last 2 times is what's happened to him. It's been kind of tragic, but let's move on to the next guy, and that's Ken Boyer. There's his 55 Topps rookie card. 11-time All-Star, 1964 National League Most Valuable Player, 5-time Gold Glove Award winner, 282 home runs, a 287 career batting average, and 2,143 hits. I mean, my philosophy is, he was a very good player during that time as well in the 60s. Probably, when it comes to at least the National League, I'm trying to think of who was a better third baseman in the National League. Brooks Robinson, definitely in the American League. But unless I'm missing something, who was a fantastic third baseman offensively, defensively in the National League in the 60s, it's got to be Ken Boyer. 11-time All-Stars. There's not too many players that are not in the Hall of Fame that have this many All-Star appearances. He's definitely up there. Yeah, Dan.
Santos probably the only one that you could really compare him to, and their
Good
careers
point.
are
Yep.
similar.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I would sure vote for him. His stats are really, really well at that time in the 60s. But again, like we said in the beginning, we're comparing him to guys with a little bit more modern era and guys that go way back. So this is one of those players that I feel, unfortunately, is going to fall in between just a wide range of errors. So, Dan, you have any thoughts on Boyer?
Yeah, I feel like you're right about that. If he's on a ballot that's very specific to an era, he's got a better shot.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to get in this time. I don't think that I do think that he should. One of the problems with Boyer is that he has such a massive drop off. He wins the 64 MVP. 65, he starts having back problems. His numbers go way down. He gets traded to the Mets. He gets traded to the White Sox. And his last 4 or 5 years are really not good years. And if he had been, and starting at like age 32, so he's almost like a Don Mattingly figure in that respect, or Al Rosen, or another guy who, like at age 30, 32, starts getting back injuries, and that kind of ruins his career. But even that, 11-time All-Star, like you said, probably, if not the top third baseman in the National League in that time frame, top 3 at worst.
Yeah.
And he's, he did, he was a good teammate. He was a team captain. He ended up being a manager. He worked in the minor leagues, and sadly died at the age of, I think, 51 or 52 from lung cancer. So he hasn't had the opportunity to have post-career politicking like some other guys have had. So I don't know. Ken Boyer has, as far as I'm concerned, a Hall of Fame career, but he's just kind of got some bad luck.
This ballot's crowded. That's why this ballot's very crowded.
I took out his 56, which is very, very similar to his 55, except they got him committing an error on the action shot. Poor Ken wasn't really a good fielder, so his fielding WAR is, I think, +10 for his career, so it's pretty solid.
And he comes from a pretty stocked family in baseball. His brother, Clete Boyer, was a fantastic third baseman for the Yankees. And I forgot the third Boyer, if you guys remember the third Boyer.
His older brother is Cloyd, who was a pitcher.
Cloyd.
Yeah.
Chris.
Well, I got to watch how I tread on this one. I am right smack in the middle of Cardinal Nation. And if I say anything bad, I'm going to get Billy Ballgame's going to call me crying. And, so I got to watch out this. But I love baseball, and I love studying baseball. And if I pose the question to you, if you didn't see somebody play, how could you prove to me, with what stat could you prove to me that he was a great defensive player? And so I'm posing that question for a real quick answer from anybody here. Errors, okay.
Gold Gloves.
Okay. Anything else?
I agree with both of them. Yeah.
How about fielding percentage?
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you if somebody's a better third baseman by his fielding percentage than I can by any of those other two stuff, because your errors, you might have more chances than somebody else. Heck, somebody might have more errors because he can get the ball. He has to, he gets the ball standing up that the other ones can slide, and he can get a Gold Glove just because of reputation. But you cannot run from the fielding percentage. And when I look at somebody like Ken Boyer, and have been told all my life what a great defensive player he is, I would think his fielding percentage would be crazy good. Well, we all know Brooks Robinson. We look at his Gold Gloves, look at his fielding. His fielding percentage is 20 points higher than Kenny Boyer's.
Wow.
But what if I told you that there's a guy that, and they're not same era, but Ron Say, who is the only guy in the world I believe played baseball without any knees, because he never bent them running, right? You remember him running like a penguin.
A penguin.
What if I tell you that his fielding percentage is 9 points higher than Ken Boyer's? What if I tell you that Ken Boyer fielding percentage is worse than Ron Santo? But yet I'm coming to believe that Gold Gloves, if you win one, it takes a lot to get one away from you.
Yep.
George Brett had a .001 fielding percentage worse than Ken Boyer's. And no one here has ever said George Brett's a great fielder.
Good point.
And so I kept looking that up, and I thought, wow, what always put him over the hump with me was, he was an MVP. People loved him. They voted for him because he was an all-star a lot, and he won a handful of Golden Gloves and was probably in the consideration of all those.
Right.
But yet his fielding percentage, and I haven't gone through it most, but what always carried me over the hump was he was pretty good, but man, he was a great fielder.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be a contradiction in terms tonight, or in my behavior, which does not surprise any of you three. But I was disappointed when I did my research on Ken Boyer a little bit. But and here I'm going to say this: I think he's a Hall of Famer, but I'm not over the top like, everybody's saying that. Not everybody. Some people thinks he's a sure thing. And my Cardinal friends who are going to be watching this would be commenting right now. You might get kicked off. You might get kicked off YouTube, Ray. I'm just telling you. But it was when I hope that surprised a couple of you when I said that. And maybe you look at him a little bit different now. So there. That's my thoughts on Ken Boyer. Now just wait till later.
Fair enough. Greg?
So I pulled up. I'm looking at his stats right now because that did surprise me, especially being 5 Gold Gloves. He did lead the league in fielding percentage at third base in 1965 toward the end of his career, which is interesting. His last year in St. Louis, but the thing that Chris points to, he said a minute ago, and I don't know, should I be arguing for or against all these guys? I don't know, but so I'm just cleaning up at the bottom here. I'm going through things that people haven't mentioned that I think are interesting. But Chris just mentioned a second ago about how much WAR matters to him, and out of the 8 guys on this list, he has the second highest career WAR. And he has the highest of all the hitters. There's a pitcher who has a higher WAR. So if WAR is a big deal, then part of me thinks, well, maybe he should be considered. And being the best player the reason he made so many All-Star games, well, number one, I don't know, are all those All-Star games, because there were years that there were 2 All-Star games. So I don't know if
had a few doubles,
Yeah.
So,
Early
so
60s.
that could have padded those stats a little bit. But when you have that many All-Star games, and you're the best player at the position, or second best in maybe some cases at the position that many times in the league, that is a pretty big statement too. So the things that stick out to me is second highest WAR. I'm big on defense. Did Chris just talk me out of him being a good defender? Maybe a little, maybe a little. I'm open to that. But the other thing is he produced. I mean, he had 7 straight seasons before the injury in the year that Dan pointed out. He had 7 straight seasons of 90 or more RBIs. Wow. And in all but one of those, I think it was 94 or more. When I was looking at the stats, it was like 94 or more RBIs in 6 of the 7 seasons. And the one that wasn't 94 was 90. And that's a lot of RBIs. And especially, again, this is a different era where the games weren't 15 to 12 every night, So I think that you could definitely make a really, really strong argument that he should be in. And I'll be honest with you guys, I haven't decided my 3 picks. I'm assuming at the end we're going to say, okay, you have 3 picks. Who are your 3? Yeah. I haven't decided. I know there's one I'm pretty sure on, 2 I think I'm pretty sure on, but the jury is still out. So but those are numbers that I think matter. And the fact that he had those 7 straight seasons of 90 or more RBIs before the injury, and then he has the injury and it falls way off. Again, like I said when we first started with Dick Allen, I'm kind of a guy who was a star when he was a star, who is great, even if it was for a shorter period of time. I'm a pro Mattingly, I'm a pro Munson guy, and so the compilers sometimes I kind of roll my eyes at a little bit. And Ken Boyer wasn't a compiler. Ken Boyer was just a really, really good third baseman for a short period of time.
Yeah. And the other thing to point out too is that third base is really not represented a lot in the
I was
Hall of
just
Fame.
about to say that.
Grossly.
Literally just about to say that. Yep.
So we'll see. Great player. Great player. Next up, John Donaldson. Played more than 30 years, earning a reputation as one of the best pitchers in the game, also playing the outfield, which I didn't know, and managing. So before we get into, yeah, go ahead, Chris. You had something you wanted to show of Donaldson?
Love this set.
Oh, yeah. Is that the Frisch set?
You got me. I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
I just know that. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool set.
I really looked hard for this card, and I really want to find the Gibson card. So
yeah. Well, I want to see if I can real quick try and add a little video here about John Donaldson. There's a documentary called 39 Seconds, and it's about this footage here that I'm going to play real quick.
A local production will debut. It's a film. 39 Seconds is the name. Later this month. It's based on the life of John Donaldson, a left-handed pitcher in the Negro Leagues. About 100 years ago, he made stops in Minnesota. They found the only footage available of him in his career, and that led to this.
This is the only existing footage.
In 1924, John Donaldson was barnstorming, pitching in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, when this rare footage was captured, and that set the wheels in motion.
Well, I'm sure he'll show up someday, Wilkie. He's probably hurt.
After researching, they decided to make a docudrama film on the left-handed pitcher that was a superstar for the Kansas City Monarchs.
But the reason we don't know about him, because he was a black man playing in the Negro Leagues and was, quickly forgotten about.
A treasure was resting underneath a bed in Fergus Falls, Minnesota.
What they saw in the only 39 seconds recorded of his pitching career is what he did when he came to these small towns.
And he'll go to these different towns, shut down everything, not just because he was a black man playing in these small white towns, but because he was the best.
What a gentleman he was. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he was into exercising, which really wasn't a thing 100 years ago.
We got our first game in a week. That's all we need to be thinking about.
That's what they felt as they continued the process, putting together a cast here in Minnesota and setting up a stage.
That's amazing.
A long editing process worth it. Motivated because they believed that John Donaldson deserved his day.
He was a man of God. And just, he's devout not only to his religion, but to the game of baseball.
You can see him right there.
How good was he? Well, according to one major league general manager at the time, he would have been rich if baseball was integrated.
He said if John Donaldson was white, I'd pay him $50,000 to play. And in that time, $50,000, that's a LeBron James contract. Right there.
Do you wish you could choose what you earned?
Yeah, so let me get rid of that for a second there. So yeah, there's about John Donaldson right there. As much as that we can, we could find on him. Let me get back to this here. Okay, so anybody want to share anything? And now I know Major League Baseball recently has incorporated Negro League stats. And there's no pitching stats. I've already looked on Baseball Reference. It's hitting, but the pitching, from what the little bit I've learned about him, was just phenomenal. So if anybody has any discussion or thoughts on John Donaldson, feel free.
Well, I know Chris has several, so I don't want to jump in there, but I dug around a little bit online, because I'm not even going to pretend like I'm a John Donaldson expert. And I just was looking and finding different sites with different things. And one of the things is a lot of his stats and a lot of his appearances weren't in like the official Negro League. I mean, there were adopted Negro Leagues, and then there were other, barnstorming leagues and stuff. So a lot of it is, hard to know what's what, and it makes it even with some of the leagues that Major League Baseball adopted, I know there's a lot of people who aren't sure what to make of some of that. And I get all that. But some of the things that I found stat wise, according to, I can't even cite where it came from, that he had 5,221 strikeouts. He had a career ERA of 1.37. He had 11 games of 25 or more strikeouts. He had 14 no-hitters.
That's unbelievable.
He had 424 wins in his 718 appearances.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if any of that's, real, or if it's, what I don't know.
Right.
But when you hear stuff like that, and again, somebody mentioned earlier, Chris just said it, I guess. He said, if you never saw someone play, how do you know if they were good at this or that without actually seeing it?
Right.
And I think this is a perfect example is, the only way you can know is by asking the people who did see it.
Right.
And based on what they say is how you extrapolate what they were. And based on that, he's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Right? But what's the reliability of that? And if we start going on the reliability of what people say, then who knows what to believe anymore about a lot of the old time stuff. So I don't really know what to think on it, but I found that stuff interesting. Last thing I'll say is, in his official Negro League stats, he was 6-9 with a 4.14 ERA, and he hit 6 home runs and had 118 RBIs. But again, this is after he had been playing for a very long time.
Right.
So he was not a young man anymore. So
scroll down just a little bit farther on that stat there. You'll see that in the Negro Leagues itself, he's 26 and 22.
Okay.
If you scroll down a little bit farther. But do you want to say something, Dan? Because I am chomping at the bit like Mike Tyson trying to get out there.
Well, I'll clear space for you, Chris, but just to say this, I think Donaldson is one of those guys that you have to take into account his historical significance, because he's not only great for as a player who helped develop the interest to bring about the Negro Leagues, because he played, I don't know, a dozen years before they even existed, but he's also the guy who sort of invented the barnstorming tours, which we then learn about later on in the century. So he's historically significant. Are those numbers correct? Greg, I agree with you on all that, but I feel like Donaldson has such a strong presence in terms of having people do research, that these people track those numbers down. They didn't just make them up. Of what level they are, of, who he was playing against when he threw all those no-hitters, we don't really know, but we do know that there's a really strong presence for people who want Donaldson in, and those people have convinced me. So, Chris,
so those numbers aren't made up, which is very cool. They are newspaper witnesses. There's a network out there called the Donaldson Network that was started by a group of guys in Minnesota a long time ago, led by a guy named Pete Gordon. Now, Pete Gordon, I've never seen anybody work so hard on a project, and he's made it his life goal to get Donaldson in the Hall of Fame. Why do I care? I live in I live in Glasgow, Missouri, which is a town of 1,100 people. Born in Glasgow, Missouri in the late 1880s was John Donaldson, who the town just built him a baseball field and a life-size statue overlooking the baseball field, because his family still lives here.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so they had Heritage Days here in Glasgow 3 years ago when he was on, or 4 years ago, right before he was on the ballot. And this Pete Gordon and his network was given all the information in the world to try to get support for Donaldson. He gave me the job of contacting various baseball players. And one letter that I got back from a player, I got back tons of letters. One of them was from Freddie Lynn. And he said, I understand that he was the best player in the teens. And so, you know, he made the model of barnstorming, and he was not a poor man. So nobody should feel sorry for him, because during the Depression, he made money when nobody else made money touring. And he left the big middle of Missouri, where he played on different teams, played in some famous ballparks around Sedalia, Missouri, but then traveled to Minnesota and found that he could make a living there. And he gave up playing days. Matter of fact, the Monarchs were on a season where they were going to make the playoff, not the playoffs, they're going to make the Negro League World Series. And he chose to play in Minnesota because he didn't want to, he had some obligations there. I don't want to make it sound bad. He had obligations, but he only played a few games for them because he wanted to go back and make money in Minnesota. But he is a man of everything that I know, a man of integrity, because he got offered $100,000 to move to Cuba for a few years, change his name, and come back in the United States and play baseball. And he said, I'm not going to change my name or my race for anybody. And it's a quote that he has. Now, I'm not just saying that kind of stuff. We all know Bill James, and I respect Bill James. And I have this book right here. This Bill James Bible that I just love. I get a lot of stuff out of it. And then, I'm sorry. That's the book, Historical Baseball Abstract. And if he has a thing in here about the Negro Leagues, where he puts it up and wraps it up in a box. And he has John Donaldson as the best left-handed pitcher in baseball in the teens. He has him the best pitcher in the Negro Leagues for 4 years, for 4 straight years. He has him as the second hardest throwing second hardest throwing pitcher, and the inventor of the slider. So to me, that's some big stuff. And I want to say this last, because I know you're done hearing me be excited about this. But in 1960, Negro Leagues was shot, right? Everything's falling apart and shot. And they got alumni Negro Leaguers and players that were, or former players of the Negro League, to put down the all-time baseball team so it would never be forgotten. And that's why I call John Donaldson the forgotten man of baseball, because in 1960, he was voted as the best left-handed pitcher ever in the Negro Leagues. And
that's saying something.
And we, by that group in 1960, and it wasn't just a made-up group. It was, it was a group of Negro Leaguers and former Negro Leaguers. And if you're going to be the best of anything for a whole league and a whole generation of baseball, you're pretty damn good.
Yeah. And
so to me, I really push for them to put him in. But again, I can argue every minute of the day why he shouldn't be in. But to me, John Donaldson is the lost player of baseball. And if he doesn't get in, and the other player gets in, I think he suffered 2 travesties. And the first travesty is he did not get in the last time he was on the ballot. He got 8 votes or something like that of what he needed. But Buck O'Neil got in. Now, Buck O'Neil should be in the Hall of Fame in 20 different areas and whatever. But Buck O'Neil probably is not a Hall of Fame baseball player. Buck O'Neil was a good defensive player, but we try to even stretch it out even farther to make him a great defensive player. And when they had the big group of Negro Leaguers elected to the Hall of Fame, they asked Buck O'Neil if they got them all. And he said, no, we didn't get them all. There's still some out there that needs to come in. And he said, what about you, Buck? And he said, I don't deserve to be standing next to those guys. I deserve to be coaching those guys, but I don't deserve to be standing next to those guys. And I thought that was something amazing to hear.
And one last thing to piggyback off of that, Chris, and all great points too, by the way. And I've heard all them stories because there's a, for information, there's a podcast out there called Black Diamonds, which is hosted by Bob Kendrick.
What a
who is
great one. Yeah.
He's the president of the Negro League Museum. And one last tidbit about John Donaldson: he was hired as the first black major league scout by the Chicago White Sox, and he was credited for pursuing Willie Mays and Ernie Banks. So, guy had a long, interesting life, for sure. Let's move on to the next player in the ballot, and here, popular guy. Here's his rookie card, the 71 tops, and we're talking about Mr. Steve Garvey, 294 career batting average, 2,599 career hits, 272 career home runs, 1,308 RBIs, 10-time All-Star, and the 1974 National League MVP, which should have been won by Mike Schmidt, but that's another story. My thoughts on Garvey, and my thoughts on Garvey is I was a big fan of Garvey growing up, late 70s, early 80s. And a lot of people, and this gets lost, this little information is that Steve Garvey was making a really conscious effort to break in Lou Gehrig's consecutive game streak. Back, when he started playing, he played, I think he's fourth place all time, but he's first in the National League for consecutive game streak. And there was a time, I remember watching him on Saturday Game of the Week with Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubek, and they used to talk about how big his forearms were. He was like Popeye. He was the first using the Nautilus machines. This guy was an Iron Man. I really thought that he was going to break Lou Gehrig's record. I mean, the guy was man of steel. He was made out of steel. You couldn't hurt him. He goes to the San Diego Padres. I think I want to say 84. There's a play at the plate, and he broke either his hand or his wrist or something. He couldn't even grab the bat, streak over. And I think he finished somewhere in the teens, if I'm not mistaken, like 1,400 consecutive games. So he was like maybe 3 or 4 more seasons away from passing Lou Gehrig. And you know what? He breaks that record. We're not even talking about Garvey right now. He would have been in. Some people, a 10-time All-Star. I thought that was the record for most All-Star appearances by a non-Hall of Famer, but Ken Boyer had 11. Bill Freehan, I think, had 10 or 11 as well. But still, that's a lot. I mean, this guy was a consistently very, very good player. Enough of me. Dan, what's your thoughts on Steve Garvey?
Can't stand him.
Really? Well, that just shoots me down, right?
You spend too much time around John Keating, because I hear they're best friends. So
I review, as we talked in the text chat, I reviewed some of Jay Jaffe's writing about these candidates, and I was amused by some of the stuff in the Garvey piece, because Jay's not only a very smart guy and really good with numbers, but he's also a very funny gentleman. So
yeah,
Garvey compiler, yes, but he's got those All-Star games. Was he the best first baseman in the National League during that time period? I don't know. I mean, what about Stargell and McCovey and all those other guys? I mean, he's not a player that I ever liked. And of course, I'm rooting for the Yankees in the 77 and 78 World Series, and so I don't like this guy. And he had that image, the sort of all-American image, and some of his Dodger teammates thought he was a self-promoter to the point where he and Don Sutton had a
big fight. Yeah,
fight in the clubhouse. I think it might have even been in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Not Yankee Stadium, but Shea Stadium. But anyway, so I don't think he rises to the level of Hall of Famer. I of course have his rookie card from '71. No big deal. It's not that expensive of a card. My favorite stat for Garvey is after his playing days, when his marriage was falling apart, he was having affairs with 4 women at once and got 3 of them pregnant. So I think that's a Hall of Fame stat.
Right.
But maybe not his
Wow, man. So we just went down a whole different road for Steve Garvey.
So
No, I heard that. I heard that same story. I mean, he was Mr. Squeaky clean, in the 70s. And then I think Sport Magazine did an article of him, and it was with front cover was him and his wife. And that blew my mind. Like all of a sudden, this good guy image just went boom. Like he went a whole different direction. And I think that could have, I don't think he was a compiler though, because he really didn't become an everyday player until, 73, 74. The first couple of years he was,
well,
riding
the quote from Don Sutton that caused the fight was that Don Sutton said, Steve Garvey's not even our best player. Our best player is Reggie Smith. As Reggie Smith goes, this team goes. And, what's ironic about that is that Reggie Smith is not in the Hall of Fame, and he could be on this list of 8 guys just as much as Garvey.
Easily. Yep.
He's on my list, though. He's on my list, Reggie Smith.
Yeah, Chris.
Well, okay, so I'm totally different than that for a second, okay? I'm in different stages of my knowledge of baseball from my childhood until now. For the longest time, I thought Steve Garvey was the prototypical Hall of Famer. On every All-Star game I saw, Steve Garvey was prominent, being interviewed, all that kind of stuff. Now, remember, I grew up a Cincinnati Reds fan early, but as a kid, I didn't have much hatred in me. I wanted, it wasn't like I wanted their best player to have a car wreck on the way to the game. Not like today. Today, I root for different weird things. But when you looked at Garvey through my 10-year-old eyes, you're talking about a guy that was on everything, being interviewed by everybody, always in the All-Star, and the Dodgers seemed like they were always good. And as I grew and learned more and more, you talking about you thought Boyer screwed me up with the defense. Garvey screwed me up too. Garvey's 3 Golden Gloves, right? But yet I would like to know what his defensive WAR is. Didn't check it out today, but I bet it's not very good because his WAR is not very strong. But, I just always pictured him as one of the best 5-10 players in baseball my whole time growing up. And then when I fell over the top with Garvey as far as a player goes is when the San Diego Padres was an okay team, trying to break in to be better than the Reds and everybody else. And they picked up 2 old guys. One, I can't believe I'm saying something nice about him, but they picked up Nettles from the Yankees and they picked up Garvey from the Dodgers. And I said, what's 2 old guys going to do? Well, I'll be goddamn if they didn't go and go and do some great things. It was so good that I believe Garvey got his uniform retired, right?
I think so.
And then if you can get your uniform retired by 2 different teams, you're pretty damn good, apparently. Mm-hmm. But then I started reading more and more and more, and then I became a bona fide player as an adult, as a college player and, different things. And then become a coach. And I read an article, and it's probably in this book right here about Steve Garvey. And I like Bill James. I don't quite understand sabermetrics the way, math teachers probably should. But when I read the fact that he had a system to everything, he had a goal of getting 200 hits every year, and he didn't care. He cared more about getting 200 hits than he cared about anything else. But he literally set out a plan that he was going to, there was going to be a certain amount of time that he was going to lay down a bunt to get that extra hit and draw the infield in some to help him with his 200 hits. For a ball to be hit down to him to turn 2, he very seldom even took the chance of taking that throw to second base. Hit down to him, automatically go over to first base. So I started reading that stuff up and started thinking less and less of him. And then plus, one of my favorite YouTubers ever is John Keating. And I've never heard John Keating say one kind word about Steve Garvey. I can't believe that John Keating in a couple months has changed my mind of 25 years about Steve Garvey. But,
Chris, can I
but-
just break in for 1 second here
Please,
to
please.
confirm that, in fact, Steve Garvey has a negative 11.7 defensive WAR for his career? And here's a good one. In between the years 1973 and 1987, he had a negative defensive WAR every single season, which is remarkable.
But yet that Gold Glove means a whole lot, doesn't it? I mean, how many times you win a Gold Glove?
4.
Three? Four?
4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4 Gold Gloves. Each of those years, he had a negative defensive WAR. And in his second to last season, he had a negative defensive WAR of 2.0, which is literally they should have put somebody else to play first base.
Yeah, that's I'm glad that turned out right, because that's just what I was feeling.
Yep.
That's what I was feeling. But again, we'll talk. I'll save my vote for him. But for 40 years of my life, no, that's wrong. For 30 years of my life, I thought he was a surefire Hall of Famer that I would witness. But I don't think that much now.
Greg?
Wow, I mean, after that, goodness.
Wow. Started off strong with me, and then boom.
If he got in, it wouldn't harm me. I wouldn't be upset. He wouldn't get one of my 3 votes. I am looking at his fielding percentage though, and in 1984 he had 0 errors in 159 games, and in 1981 he had 1 error. But I don't know. I mean, he had, the numbers when I pulled up and was looking at them that kind of stood out to me. 6 out of 7 consecutive years he had 200 or more hits.
Yep.
And the 1 year he didn't have 200 hits, he had 192. So he had 92 or more hits for 7 consecutive years. I don't think he's a compiler, kind of like you said, the beginning of his career. He didn't have as many games. He really played about 14, 15 years where he was the everyday guy, and it was every day. I mean, I like John Keating a lot. So I'm a big John Keating guy. He grows on me like a fungus. So yeah, I mean, I can't, of the other number I guess I should throw out there that stood out to me is, of everybody, he has the lowest WAR on
38
overall WAR, career WAR, 38.
Yeah.
I mean, literally last.
Mhm.
So if you're a WAR person, and there are 3 guys whose career WAR is in the 60s, and Garvey's is 38.
Right.
So again, I wouldn't be heartbroken. I mean, he won an MVP, finished second another year, so he was top 2 in the MVP twice. I wouldn't be heartbroken if he got in, but I think he has no chance. Like, I think he has absolutely no chance. I mean, when you run for Senate, and
he lost last week. Yeah,
he lost this week. Runs for Senate as a Republican, and that's not gonna win a lot of fans by anybody who's an in-between person. When you're taking a stand with a polarizing political figure like he did over the last few months. So I think he has no chance. Doesn't mean that he shouldn't be in, but I think he won't be in this time for sure.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to the next guy in the ballot. Another Negro League player, Vic Harris. Very little information I found on him. 303 career batting average, 7 Negro League pennants, managed to homestead GRAIG'S for 11 seasons. I've listened to Bob Kendrick on the podcast Black Diamonds. He's been a huge advocate for Vic Harris for quite a long time, and I've seen his name pop up a lot frequently on ballots. So I just wish there was just more information other than, like, we can read newspaper articles and listen to podcasts, but I just really wish there was just a little bit more, something substantial. Not to say he doesn't belong in, but I'd like to see just a little bit more information. Thoughts on that, Dan? What are you thinking on Vic Harris?
Well, I am and have been for many years a big Bob Kendrick fan. I think he's not only great for Negro League baseball, but he's great for baseball in general.
Yes, yep. Yep.
And anytime I get a chance to hear him talk, I listen. But again, Ray, I think you're right about this. I don't think there's enough information about Vic Harris for me to make a decision on him. I looked at his Negro League stats, and from what I can tell, he was a solid player for a long time, but nothing jumped out at me. And he seems to have been sort of a speedy outfielder. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, 738 career hits, 31 homers, 303 career batting average. And again, this is with limited information.
Right.
I don't think he'd be getting in as a player. I think he'd be getting in more as a manager.
Oh,
he was the manager of the GRAIG'S, who won 3 Negro League World Series and like 7 or 9 pennants or something. I think there isn't a category for coaches in the classic era, and they're all in the same category. It's not like how last year there were some, Lou Pinellas and stuff were up. This is the only way he could get in. I think that it's as a manager, his career winning percentage as a manager
is great,
is the highest of all time, 663. So just for what that's worth.
7 pennants and World Series champs in 1948 with the Homestead Grays. Yeah. But no, I think this is for consideration of player. You could be right. Maybe they're basing it on his managerial information, but
when I looked up the classic era, there wasn't a separate group for manager. And so what it said is I wrote it down even. It said for the classic era, it's players, managers, umpires, and executives whose major contribution came before 1980.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure that his plaque would have manager on it.
They're going to definitely incorporate both. That's for sure.
Well, it definitely will. And that's why I said I started earlier with John Donaldson. It would be a shame because Buck O'Neill got in, but he never would have got in as a player. He would have got in as a, contributor and just the voice of baseball.
Right.
And if one of the Negro Leaguers gets in and it's not Donaldson again, he would be the better of the players, losing out to a guy that was an awesome. I mean, he was a good player too, but he also batted pretty far down in that order. He was player coach for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was player manager, and he's known for being the winningest manager in Negro League baseball.
Right.
So, but again, wouldn't you love to put him in so people would learn his story, though, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's what the whole thing is about, really. It's the Hall of Fame. But if we want to move on, because we've been on a long time already, we got Mr. Tommy John, and this is his 64 Topps Tommy John rookie card. 288 career wins, a 3.34 ERA, 4-time All-Star. Interesting stat I dug up was 700 career stats, which ranks him 8th all-time in career stats. And I have the rookie card here, 64 Topps in a 7 with Mr. Bob Chance on there. And famously known for what? Surgery that started. I think he got the surgery in the 74 or 75 season, missed a whole year. Now guys who have Tommy John surgeries can be out a few months and they come back even stronger. But this was the beginning. He was the first, and he was out, I know, for a while, a year and a half, and came back and, pitched great. I mean, nowadays 288 wins is a lot. You're not going to see guys getting 300 wins anymore, but at that time, 288 wins is a lot. And I look at it this way. He's very similar to Jim Cott numbers wise, and Jim Cott, deservingly so. I tooted the horn for Jim Cott. And now if Jim Cott got in, I said, then Tommy John definitely should be right behind them. Dan.
So 20 years ago, I would be 100% pro Tommy John, but I've come to think of him more as a compiler also. He pitched for, I don't know, 25 seasons or something similar to Cott. Just want to show up this one beautiful card, a PSA 7.5 of one of my favorite cards, the 1960s.
That is a nice card, yeah.
Tommy John in action. I should mention that I'm building the entire 52 card in action set from 1971 in high grade PSA holders, and I'm only 3 short. So,
Wow.
But Tommy John has a great card. So my feeling with Tommy John is, like I said, he's a compiler. I have a lot of rooting interest in him because he was on the Yankees for a long period of time. He left and then came back, and I've seen Tommy John play more than probably anyone else on this ballot. I even sort of met him live at one point. He was managing the Staten Island minor league team probably 20 years ago. I took my little sons back then. They're 25 now, but I took them to the game, and they didn't know who Tommy John was, but I certainly did. Anyway, Tommy John, 288 wins. One stat I did want to point out is that number should or could have been higher, because his win totals when he was with the White Sox are criminal low numbers.
Right.
Indeed, 1967, Tommy John in 31 starts threw 6 shutouts, and 6 shutouts led the league.
Yep.
And of those 6 shutouts, he won 10 games the whole year.
10 and 13, yeah.
He either shut the team out or he lost or got no
Right.
decision. And it's the same way the year before. He had 14 wins, led the league in shutouts with 5. So, I mean, he had a lot of probably those White Sox teams in the 60s were pretty good teams, but they were very, very pitcher heavy. So I think he probably would have had 300 wins if not for that time period, and he probably would have been in the Hall of Fame 20 years ago. I'm gonna, spoiler alert, I'm not voting for him as in my 3, but I think he's probably going to get there eventually, as you said, just like Jim Cott.
He is a 3-time 20-game winner late in his career too. Like in late 30s.
Well, the surgery, he said that the surgery extended his career for 15 years or something.
Easily. Chris.
So Tommy John's a weird one for me, but I'm going to throw something out there here in a second that I think you're going to go, holy shit. Maybe not. But I've always, I remember him pitching with the Dodgers mainly. And when he was on the Dodger staff and some of those good teams, I never thought of him as the stud or even close to it. And I'm a little bit like Greg when it comes to thinking, if you're going to be a Hall of Famer, you got to have a little bit of the Hall of Famer-ish, whatever that is. And I'm not a big compiler, but also I'm impressed when someone does. But I believe Tommy John deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He was a better pitcher in my book than Jim Cott. If Jim Cott's in, Tommy John's in. Something that I find impressive is throughout the years, if you were going to be the starting pitcher of a team, if you're going to be the ace of the team, you're going to pitch opening day. And what I find very unique with Tommy John is Tommy John. You'll have to look this up because I'm shooting off the top of my hip. So Greg, this is you probably. Tommy John started opening day 23 years apart. Name me another pitcher you know of that there's that much distance between opening day. And to me, that's impressive. And so I hope Tommy John gets in someday. When I'm 57 now, but when I turned 45 and if I was given a wish that I could face any pitcher in the American League or in baseball to get a base hit from with one at bat at the age of 45, I would have chose Tommy John because if he would have hit me, I don't think it would have hurt very much. And, he was just sneaky and crafty toward the end, and it would not have scared me to face Tommy John. But I hope someday Tommy John gets involved.
He's not a strikeout pitcher. I mean, 2,200 strikeouts. but he
in
put the ball in play.
7,000 starts or 700 starts.
Yeah, he just put the ball in play and got you out. Greg.
So you are correct. He was the opening day starter in 66 and 89. So 23 years apart. But he was the opening day starter 6 times.
Right. So he was an ace.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. This is a tough one for me because first of all, again, I'm not really a compiler fan. I'm not a fan of the compiler type. I mean, he's sort of Harold Baines of pitching. He just pitched forever. And so then he ends up with 288 wins. But he also had, like you said, 3 times he had 20 wins or more. 8 times he had 14 wins or more. 14 wins is pretty decent season. The 288 wins. He was second in Cy Young voting twice, 4th once. So there were some years that he was kind of in the mix for best pitcher in the league. But I also struggle with another guy who's coming up here in a minute. He was only an All-Star 4 times.
Right.
Only 4 times you made
in
the
that
All-Star.
many years.
And out of 25 years or something, and now you're in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, as a player, just as a player, Tommy John is not a Hall of Famer. But to me, if you add in his contributions of what he was willing to risk to change the careers of many future players, that's worth a lot to me. He's not just a player, he's also a contributor. And so because of that, he's a guy that I'm in favor of getting in. But again, not just as a player. And I know his plaque would say pitcher, player. But if it said player / contributor, I would be 100% in on it.
Right.
So if he doesn't get in, I'm not going to be heartbroken. And with any of these guys, there's nobody I'm just like absolutely 100% has to get in. I still struggle with the fact that Thurman Munson's not on the list. And I struggle with the fact that Curt Flood is not on the list.
Yeah.
To me, those are 2 guys that I think really could be in this same conversation that aren't. But I think Tommy John, well, I'm not convinced yet, but right now I think Tommy John is getting one of my 3 votes.
Oh,
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Interesting.
But we're not done. We're not done.
No.
I'm one of the pitchers coming up. You guys are gonna maybe make or break my opinion on.
Well, Greg, I tell you what we'll do since you just said that. We'll start talking slower so you can understand everything.
Next up, the Cobra. This is his 1974 tops, and we're talking, of course, Mr. Dave Parker. 290 career batting average. 2-time batting champion 1977, 1978. 339 career home runs. 1,493 career RBIs. A 7-time All-Star, 1978 National League Most Valuable Player, and a 3-time Gold Glove Award winner. Wow. Dave Parker, I was a huge fan of him, watching him. Every time I think of Dave Parker, the first thing I think of is the 1979 All-Star game in Seattle. And he made 2 rocket throws that I try and tell everybody when they show stories, they show videos of players today. I'm like, yeah, but you never saw Dave Parker's arm, man. Dave Parker had a cannon. But this was a 5-tool player before they started talking about 5-tool players when Griffey came along and guys like that. This guy could hit for power, could hit for average, had speed, could field, and could throw. He had it all. And I did a video on him last week when I talked about this ballot. And Roberto Clemente was, before the game, taking pop flies in the outfield. He was talking, I think he was talking to Manny Sanguin. They were just messing around, and he saw Dave Parker in right field, and he chuckled, and Manny was like, "What's so funny?" He's like, I just seen my replacement. There's the next right fielder. And Manny was like, "Are you kidding?" He goes, and Clemente knows. Clemente's like, "I know a right fielder when I see one." And that was Dave Parker. He was a football player and a baseball player wrapped in one. The guy was just a phenomenal athlete, great player. I think what has hurt him over the years is in the 80s with the drug problems he had. He was, in trials, and his name was coming up quite a bit. He made a comeback with the Cincinnati Reds, which is his hometown, and some say probably should have won the MVP. And I think it was '85, and I think Willie McGee won it. And I think Parker was ripped off. I mean, imagine winning the MVP so many years later after winning it in '78. But he should have been in a while ago. I'm going to say that he should have been a long time ago. But I think his reputation for some of the things that happened to him in the 80s has kind of hurt him. That's the only thing I could think of, because you don't even have to look at his numbers. You can watch the player, and he was just phenomenal. He was a freak. Dan.
Well, I mean, we have 39 seconds of John Donaldson, so we don't know. But my feeling is that Dave Parker is the best pure athlete on this list. And the talent was, as you mentioned, on display in a national audience. He did, two of the most amazing throws that you'll ever see in the same game, throwing out all-stars. But and another thing that's not on this list is the World Series. He's got 2 World Series rings, 79 and I believe 89 with the
Oakland A's, yeah.
But yeah, there's that period in his career where he has kind of a lull, and he ends up on Milwaukee, and then he's on, I don't know, a couple other teams. And
Angels.
Yeah. So good for your immaculate grid, but maybe not so good for Dave Parker's Hall of Fame chances. I've been on the fence with him for years. Again, somebody who I saw play a lot. Because he was in the National League East and he was playing against the Mets all the time. And so I feel like he should be a Hall of Famer, and maybe now is the time to put him in because, he's in very ill health. And, I hate when these guys don't get in, and then Ron 2 years later they get in. Dick Allen is another example. Tiant we talked about earlier. So I think for just, purposes of justice, he should probably get in this time. And, he certainly is. Nobody's going to bat an eyelash at his qualifications, sir.
No, not at all. Mr. Missouri.
I tell you what, everything you just said there, Dan, I kind of agree with, but I just like to talk every once in a while. And this is Dave Parker is the better version of the studs of the badass studs of the late 70s. He's a better version of George Foster, and he's a better version of Jim Rice. He was the best player on the Pirates team, even when Willie won the MVP. He was the best player, or I don't care where he ranked at the end of the season, but from 78 through 85, he was one of the best players in baseball. Period. And I nicely landed. So I wrote down some stuff at the end of a Baseball Reference. They compare you who you're most likely like. And Dick Allen was compared to Doby and Trout. Steve Garvey, 12 years of his playing years, 12 years of Garvey's playing years, his most liked player was Garrett Ganderson. What is his name?
Curtis Granderson.
Curtis Granderson.
Oh.
On Parker, it's Tony Perez, Billy Williams, Harold Baines,
Andre Dawson.
Some
those
are Hall of
names.
Fame.
Yep.
And every one of those guys, if you put him standing right next to them, and you were picking a team to be on your baseball team, like you're at recess, you would not have picked anybody else besides Dave Parker. And my funny anecdote, I was getting George Brett's autograph at the end of a ball game once, and he was on the hood of his car with Jamie Quirk and their 2 girlfriends. And one guy came over and was telling him something, and I heard him say he is the best baseball player in baseball. That's one badass son of a gun. And Jamie Quirk said, "Who?" And he said, "Dave Parker." And Jamie Quirk said, "No kidding. Wouldn't he be fun? Wouldn't he be fun for you to bat in front of?" And I remember Jamie Quirk saying that. And as a 13-year-old kid or 12-year-old kid, boy, that resonates with you. So one bad son of a gun, put him in the Hall of Fame while his family can see him enjoy it. That's it.
Greg.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I think the thing that hurts him is when you think of an outfielder that wasn't who was he had a really, really strong arm. I mean, even at the end of his career, when I was watching him on the A's, he still had a strong arm. But the thing about him that I think is interesting is that as an outfielder, he wasn't a prolific slugger. He had a couple of 30 home run seasons. He had a lot in the teens. He had a lot in the 20s. But a lot of people don't give the credit of a hitter that an outfielder is, unless the outfielder is hitting 30 home runs every single year and not just a couple of times. If he had 400 home runs, he would have been in a long time ago. But because he has like 340 or something, he's not in. And that I think is too bad. To me, when I first saw the list, he was one of it's time for him to get in. It was kind of one of the easy choices. That the one I'm struggling with is what my third would be. But to me, it's kind of an obvious one. Now, I will say that I wasn't a fan of those A's in 88 and 89. And I rooted for the Giants in that World Series. And living in Northern California, they were on TV a lot. And I was not a big fan of Dave Parker at that time. There was a chip on a lot of those guys' shoulders, and they would do their home run trot with a lot of swagger. And him and Dave Henderson and, Carney Lansford and some Terry Steinbach and those guys. And I did a lot of my eye rolling, but yeah, I think that he's absolutely worthy of getting it.
Yeah. And when Chris was doing the similarities, players on the bottom, he's right there with these guys. And I think he's better than a couple of these guys that are already in. And he should have won the MVP in 1985. I'm looking at his numbers. He had better numbers in 1985 than when he won the MVP in 78. In 1985, 198 hits, 2 hits short of 200. Led the league in doubles with 42. Led the league in RBIs with 125. Led the league in total bases. He finished second in MVP to Willie McGee. And again, no disrespect to Willie McGee, but 198 hits, led the league in doubles, 34 homers, 125 RBIs with a 312 average. Come on.
He also finished third in MVP voting twice.
Right.
So he's top 3 4 times.
And he also did not have a lot of protection in the lineup behind him. It got to where people weren't afraid to pitch to Willie Stargell, right?
Right.
And I can tell you that hurts some athletes. I can tell you George Brett having Frank White hitting behind him did him no favors.
I watched a little documentary with Pete Rose. It's a documentary on Dave Parker on MLB Presents, and there's a segment where Pete Rose is talking about, because Pete managed him with the Reds, and he said, and he goes, and even when Pete played at third base with the Reds, he's like, man, watching Dave Parker rounding second and rounding third to come home, it was like chugga 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 chugga. It was like a freaking linebacker coming home. It was like, get out of his way, man. The dude was a beast. But we got one player left, and unfortunately, this player recently passed away, and we're talking about Louis Tiant. And this is his 1965 top. Beautiful rookie card, by the way. 65 tops rookie card. 229 career wins, a 3.30 ERA, He had 4 times a 20-win season. And here's another stat: 2-time ERA title leader. One led the league in the ERA twice. In the year in 1968, which is considered the greatest year in pitching in baseball, they've written books called "The Year of the Pitcher." I think one's called in '68. The thing that's a little surprising here is a 3-time All-Star, but I think this guy should absolutely been. He should have already been in. There's been comparisons, and the 2 pitchers that are in the Hall of Fame now that I compare him to him, and there's no disrespect to these other 2, they deserve to be in. But if you do a comparison with him and Catfish Hunter and him and Jim Bunning, Tiant's got them beat on so many categories. I mean, they got him beat on a couple, but he's got them beat on a lot of categories. And it's unfortunate, like what Dan was saying, that these guys now have passed away. It's going to be sad if that happens this year. And he just passed away like about a month ago. So, Dan, you're up.
So Louis Tiant is the other person on this list who I met. And it was when he signed this 1970 Topps card. It was, I think it was 18 or 19. They did like a Yankee special in Jersey, and they had a whole bunch of former Yankees come in. So Tiant was there, and he was really pleasant and laughing and stuff. And then I went up to him, and he slid him this card from probably the worst year of his career. And he gave me a little frown, and then he signed it, and he handed it back to me. So, I mean, what hurts Tiant is, yes, he was, his 1968 season is ridiculous. Like 1.6 ERA or something.
Yep.
And all the shutouts and stuff. And then he gets traded to the Twins because his arm is shot. And then he gets released and gets picked up by Atlanta, and they release him. And suddenly he's pretty much close to being out of baseball. And then the Red Sox took a flyer on him. And his arm got better, and then all of a sudden he had a whole rejuvenated career. So he lost about 3 years in the middle of his career with no stats at all. Mm-hmm. And then so his career with the Red Sox is terrific. It's like 6 or 7 years where he's one of the best pitchers in the American League. And then he comes to the Yankees, and the Yankees had a commercial. He came to the Yankees in '79 after the '78 season when the Yankees, obviously beat the Red Sox in that playoff game. And it was a commercial for a hot dog company in New York, and the tagline was Louis Tiant in his Spanish accent saying, "It's great to be with a wiener."
That's classic.
He had that "great to be with a wiener" commercial, which I always loved in New York. And then he was pretty much shot at that point anyway. But I think that the great comparison that you just made, Jim Bunning, Catfish Hunter, both Hall of Famers. Louis Tiant, Hall of Famer, should have been in before. I really don't have anything else to say other than, I think he's probably one of my 3.
Chris.
So I love that. Now, this is where Greg earlier comes out to play with me, because if there's anybody that acted and seemed like a Hall of Famer with the way he is Louis Tiant. Louis Tiant was a flamethrower when he was first in baseball. I mean, he just threw hard. That's how he pitched. And like he said, he had to reinvent himself. He was done. And then he had to become a bulldog and try to figure out how to get somebody out. And he was one of my least liked guys of all time. 75 World Series. I mean, he was incredible against the Reds. They couldn't figure him out. But he was always the center of attention. And I did a study, it started off on the Nolan Ryan, because everybody talked about how bad teams Nolan Ryan played with. And I wanted to find out how much better he was percentage-wise than the teams that he played for. Because if you're going to be great, you're going to be better than your team. And Louis Tiant, and I don't have it here, but I believe he was 60% better. His personal record was 60% better than his team's personal record. So what that means to me is he stopped all losing streaks. You put him on the mound and you're not going to lose. if you're going through a bad turn, he's going to correct you. He pitched in huge games. He threw 200 innings in a game once, in games and stuff. And he's a winner. To me, he's a Hall of Famer because he represents Cuba. I can't think of a better pitcher. I can't think of somebody that meant more to the country than him. When I think of Fernando Valenzuela, when I think of him, I think of Louis Tiant because he meant that much to people. And again, he acted like he was a Hall of Famer, and he was a star, and he was one of the best pitchers in the league when I was molding my mind. So again, and here's the thing, you just like you say, you judge him with somebody. There's 3 different Hall of Famers, and everybody else is close to being a Hall of Famer, and
Drysdale's the other one.
Yeah, Drysdale. Yeah. And I just think he's in there. He actually could be in there if they had categories. He could actually be in there for a flamethrower and a crafty Tommy John kind of pitcher.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Greg.
I mean, I struggle with this one. I'm just looking at my screen here. He had 4, 5, 6, 7 times he had 11 or more losses. And he played on bad teams. Okay. He had one season he had 20 losses.
Yeah,
Hall
1969. Yeah.
Hall of Famer had 20 losses. He never finished in the top 3 of Cy Young voting. Never. Top 3. So you were never in the top 3 in your league as a pitcher, but you're in the Hall of Fame? Like, I'm not saying the guy didn't have some really good seasons. He absolutely did, and his ERA at times was phenomenal. But he also had several seasons where his ERA was over 4. And there's a 4.85, a 4.02, a 4.53, a 4.89. I don't know. Like, he had a 4 20-game win seasons. Like, I get it, and what he meant to Cuban baseball, I think, is one of his best attributes. I think that's important. If he got in, I wouldn't be like bummed out. But for me, if I get 3 votes, he's not getting one of my 3. That doesn't mean he shouldn't eventually get in. I think he absolutely will eventually get in. And I think that you could absolutely make a strong argument. These 2 guys just did make a strong argument that he's worthy of it. But I just struggle. If you only made 3 All-Star games and you were never in the top 3 in your league as a pitcher in the voting, how do you make the Hall of Fame?
Right.
That's my struggle. So I never got to see him pitch. He retired when I was 3. So I don't have that experience, but that's where I'm at with it. A lot of complete games, have a lot of respect for that. But when you have these 8 names on the list, he's above a few of the names. He's the middle of the pack for me, but he's not top 3.
Hey, can I step in real quick?
Yeah,
sure.
Because I agree with what Greg says, so I'm not trying to argue any of his points. But out of all the players here, going to a game that Louis Tiant was in was a carnival.
I could see that.
And everybody, just and watching a game of the week that Louis Tiant was going to be on was top notch for me. It was like, okay, yeah, I'll go do that later, but I'm gonna watch Louis Tiant. Louis Tiant's pitching tonight. Oh yeah, and when anybody else here, I mean, they're all great players. They're awesome. Everybody's great.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say, hey guys, I'm staying home tonight because Kenny Boyer's going to be batting 3rd tonight, or Dave Parker, and all of them are great players. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay home and watch Vida Blue pitch against Louis Tiant.
Great matchup.
And so, but again, does that warrant Hall of Fame status? But to me, it warrants carnival status.
One of the things about Tiant is 1975 is one of those years, Greg, where his ERA was over 1. I'm sorry, over 4. It was like 4.02 or something.
Yeah.
That's also the year he pitched a complete game shutout in Game 1 of the 1975 World Series.
Same year he pitched against Nolan Ryan and threw in a game-to-game deal, and afterwards they were guessing on how many pitches he threw.
And he won 2 games in that 75 World Series, and actually was supposed to win more, but there was all this rain and stuff. So,
but I mean, he's on a World Series team that year and had 14 losses. So you can't say, well, he had a lot of losses because he was on a bad team. He had 14 losses. I mean, I remember when Storm Davis had 20 wins for the A's. He was 20-10, and I'm like, 10 losses and your team made the World Series, like. So I don't know, and he had 14. So I hear you guys. And again, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem if any of these 8 guys get in. I really don't. I don't go, that's a travesty. I think all 8 of these guys are more deserving than some people that are in, quite frankly. So, you know, but if I'm looking through the lens of I'm a voter tonight and I get 3 picks and I have to pick who my 3 are. And that's it. I think it's really difficult, and I would absolutely love to be a fly on the wall when these 16 guys plus the commissioner are in the room, 17 guys in the room arguing for and against certain people. I think that would just be
mind-blowing.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
They should watch this video before they do any of that, though.
Exactly.
Clearly.
And I know we've been on here a long time, but I think, I mean, this is must watch because I dreaded coming on here because I knew it was going to be a long deal, but I'm not ready for this stuff to be over with. So everybody, I say let's just finish strong. You know,
let's show our John Donaldson cards, Chris. You have a John Donaldson card, so do I.
I already showed mine.
Oh, you did? Okay, well, I'll show mine.
Let me show mine real quick. Love it right there.
Yeah, I think that's from the Frisch set. Not Larry Frisch, I think.
Let's see his though. I want to see it.
I have a John Donaldson card.
He looks a little different.
Yeah.
Why they were putting this guy, a middling, well-traveled middle infielder on the ballot. So
famous Negro Leaguer. I thought you were going to show Vic Harris, the 1977 San Francisco Giants Vic Harris.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the point now where we're going to cast our votes right now. I'll start it off and I'll make it quick. My shocker here is I'm voting number 1. Mr. Dick Allen gets my vote. That's a 64 Topps rookie card. My second vote is going for the Cobra, Dave Parker. The third vote was tough between Tiant and Tommy John, but I'm going with Tiant. And there's my rookie card. So there is my 3 votes for the classic era. Dan,
is it who you think's going to get in, or who?
No, this is my vote. Who I think is going to get in. Now, I discussed in my last video the Veterans Committee. They usually don't threes a lot in the Veterans Committee. They did do 4 that year. They had Minnie Minoso, Gil Hodges. I want to say Tony Oliva and Jim Cott.
Heavy Minnesota voters, though, to tell you the truth.
And they did 2 in 19 when it was Jack Morris and Alan Trammell. And then they did 2 when it was Lee Smith and Harold Baines. But other than that, it's usually been 1.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a feeling it's going to be 2. And if I had to predict who I think the 2 is going to be, I think it's going to be Dick Allen and Dave Parker. But if I had a vote, those are my 3. Yeah, Dan.
I think you're right actually about who's going to get in. My 3 votes are Dick Allen, the aforementioned John Donaldson, although not this John Donaldson, and Louis Tiant. So I've got
really.
Yep.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised about Donaldson at all. I really wouldn't. I mean, the stories are phenomenal. Christopher.
Okay, so I'm gonna put who's gonna get in there because I know who's gonna get in there, and I'll
Oh.
tell you why. John Donaldson's gonna get in there, and here's the reason he's gonna get in there. They have this separated with two older Negro League players, so it's gonna be between John Donaldson and Vic Harris, and both and a lot of the voters are going to vote for one of the Negro League players. It's just set up like that since there's two.
I completely agree with that.
Okay.
That
Awesome.
assessment, I completely agree with.
Okay. Awesome. I got Greg's vote, so that's the thing. Now I'm going to say they're going to vote. They're going to vote for Louis Tiant because they're going to remember that he just got screwed. That just a month or so ago he passed away and does not see himself elected with the rest of the Hall of Famers, which he deserves. So they're going to vote for him because he's going to be fresh in their mind. And so they don't commit the same kind of travesty that their forefathers did. They're going to vote for Dave Parker before he passes away.
Oh, wow.
So the people that are going to be elected are going to be Dave Parker, Louis Tiant, and John Donaldson, who I think deserves to be elected. And it is a totally different thing. And I'm not trying to win back voters, but if they're only going to put three guys in, I believe it should be Dick Allen, who deserves to be in, I think, above anybody else. And I think Ken Boyer's going to go in because third base is terribly underrepresented, and I think he's the best third baseman not in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Wow, that was crazy.
It's because I'm drinking. I have a few drinks. I mean,
No,
That's okay.
I know. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start with who I think is going to get in. I think Dick Allen's getting in. I think Tiant's getting in, and I think Donaldson's getting in. I think those three are going to get in.
Those are my choices.
What's that?
That's my backup.
Those are my choices. Thank you.
I think that Parker isn't going to get in, even though I'm voting for him to get in, because I think it's going to come down to the clause in the part of the voting that talks about character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are a couple of people who maybe think he's a good enough player, but are going to do this whole, I'm holier than thou thing where they act as if they're the, morality police, and they're not going to put Parker in. But I think Parker should get in. So again, I think Dick Allen, Tiant, and Donaldson will get in. I think for me, the easy picks were Dick Allen and Dave Parker. The third one was a hard one. And when I came in, I was thinking it was going to be between Tommy John and Tiant. But listening to Chris, who knows a lot about Donaldson, and thinking about what he just explained about how it's going to play out, I actually I think that for years and years and years, baseball was all about the stats, just the numbers. It was look at the numbers. What does the number say? That's how we decide where you fall. And I feel like baseball and the Hall of Fame has moved recently into the numbers mean a lot, but the numbers aren't they're not complete. And by filling in the blanks with that, I'm going to go with Donaldson as my third pick. So I'm going Allen, Parker, Donaldson.
Yeah, that was my backup choice of I went with, for my vote, of course, was Allen, Parker, Tiant, and my backup was Allen, Parker, Donaldson. Now, Donaldson, has been talked about a lot over the past several years. So, yeah, I really would not be surprised if Donaldson gets in, because he's one of the few last Negro League players that's fantastically great that's not in yet, and it's sort of an injustice. But for a lot of these guys, it's an injustice. I mean, we mentioned about Tiant passing away, and Dick Allen came one vote short twice, and he passed away 2 years ago in 2022. I mean, I'm with you, Craig, on the stats wise. I was always a traditional stat person. You know, you needed to have 500 career homers or 3,000 career hits. If you didn't have either one of those, you should be damn close to it, like 450 or 2,700 hits with some awards if you didn't have the milestone. But definitely the Hall of Fame, I think, is moving more towards using the sabermetric stats because and that could be a good thing, because you could start seeing players like Don Mattingly, who had a shorter, superior career in a shorter time span. And I think that's going to help out, and it's getting a closer look. You hit it right on the head, where it's, you know, the traditional stats are not the complete stats. I was an advocate, total advocate. I did not like sabermetrics at all. I didn't. But after reading Jay Jaffe's book, and I love Brian Kenny on MLB Network, who's really been shoving down my throat for the past 5 years on sabermetric stats. I'm like, you know what? If he's number one on OPS plus from 64 to 74, and the guys ranked 2 to 10 are all in the Hall of Fame, that's pretty bad that the guy ranked number one on that stat is not in there. And don't ask me what OPS plus means. I don't know, but that's a pretty, I mean, that's a pretty telling thing there. So any last words from you guys? I mean, this was a lot of fun. We should do this when they come out with the BBWA ballot next month.
Well, let me say a couple of things. First, Ray, I really appreciate you having me on, especially with these two guys. These are like, you guys are like three of my favorite guys in this community. Ray, you are like, if anybody says to me, I don't really like Ray from Philly, like
That's
that
me.
guy's got problems. That guy's got problems, because Ray from Philly is as likable as they come. Chris over here, he'll give me crap, but I know deep down he loves me. But this was a lot of fun hanging out. I did a lot of stats and I did a lot of research, because I knew I was coming on with three guys who know their stuff. And I'm like, I can't look too stupid here. So, but three really good guys, three really knowledgeable guys, and I just appreciate being included.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on and doing this. I tell you what, you got me real close to leaning away from Tiant at the end there. I was like, wow. It's like 20 loss season, but then I started thinking about Negro. Negro had quite a bit of 20. I mean, even Steve Carlton had like an 18 loss season. So I was like, well, these guys pitched a lot of games. And, you know, the combination of being on a really bad team, and they pitched a lot of games past the seventh inning. You know, they pitched 8-9 innings back then.
And
so,
hurt. Hurt.
Yeah. So the loss thing kind of was like, yeah, okay, I get that. But yeah, I mean, Dan, thanks again, man, for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. These two guys, you know, you and I don't know each other that well, but I hope to change that. I hope we do know each other better. But
absolutely.
These two guys below me here are two of my favorite guys in the hobby, not just because of their channels, but because I've met them in person and they're better in person.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
This was fun for me, but I'm going to tell you, I'm a small hall guy, really. But when I look on here and look at these look at the six guys, it's hard for me to comment on Donaldson and Willis, but when I look at those six guys, I don't think they ever took the field thinking they were not as good as the people they were playing against. And you can't tell me that Tommy John didn't think that he was better than Johnny Bench. You can't tell me that Louis Tiant didn't think he was better than Achilles. I mean, so I think I truly would love to see every one of these guys in the Hall of Fame, and I think they have.
And I think eventually they all will.
Yeah, I do too.
I hope so.
This is such a
hope
crowded ballot.
I hope I see it, and I really do hope I see. John Donaldson in there because, you know,
will. Yeah.
When Buck O'Neill said, when he was asked, did we get them all? And he said, no, but we got most of them. And I think he's most of them. And I think he's the forgotten person of the Negro Leagues. But I want to thank you, Ray, for letting me be on. And I talk to my buddies about this all the time. You know, today Don and I were talking about it, Field of Dreams, and Mike and I were talking about it, and that's, I'm glad you, all three of us, or you three and I, can share this same thought. We think about the Hall of Fame. It means something to us. And I hope the people that watch us, I really hope the young people that might be watching this will learn something and just hold on to them. So this Hall of Fame thing can be important to them, whether they agree with us, whether they argue. But listen, if it can be this fun, more people need to be hosting a show like this.
If anything, this should be educational.
Thank you, guys. And I thought you guys did a pretty good job, even though you guys aren't near as educated as I am. I thought you guys did really well.
You know, Ray, I'll throw this one last thing out there, Ray, is whenever I do any sort of collaboration, I literally, my whole thought process is, I'm going to have fun doing this, and then I'm going to post it. And if anybody else enjoys it at all, good for them. Right. But I have a blast doing this kind of stuff. So whether anybody watches it or listens to it, that's just gravy, because the four of us had fun, and that's enough, you know.
And I love talking Hall of Fame. To me, I mean, it's synonymous with this and the Hall of Fame, or like peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah. You know, that went unsaid. Ray, I love that you like the Hall of Fame's really important to you, and the Hall of Fame cards are important to you. I think that means a lot to some guys like us. So thank you.
Is that our time up here? I'm going to go off.
Greg just told me, he said, Chris, shut up.
I did not do that. My phone is playing.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We should definitely do this in January.
For sure.
For the BBWAA. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you post your comments, your thoughts below, what you think, who should get in and who you think's going to get in. Until then, like I always say, guys, have fun with it, and we'll see you real soon. Take care.